Good morning, or good morning for me. Good evening for you, Christian. How are you?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm fine. Thanks, Steve, for inviting me again to another episode on this agile thing we're exploring.
Yes, and I think agile thing is an appropriate description because the more that I, the more I dig into this, almost the less clear it is. I'm getting a feel for the landscape, but I'm realizing that it is not agile. It is not this nice, tidy little wrapped present that you just adopt and all of a sudden you are agile. So today we are going to take a look at the concept of planning in the context of agile. So this will be an interesting discussion, and yeah, we're going to go in a couple different directions. We're going to start with, let me just increment here. So, did you have a chance to watch this video, Christian?
Yes, I watched it yesterday and today, and it is really a condensed way of giving some views on this topic. I think some are a little bit, might be a little bit provoking for many people, but I find it very valuable because knowing the aspects and the edges of viewpoints is very good to orient, not to take it too serious or not being so, to speak, confident that we do agile right, just to be more open-minded and have some viewpoints. Because what I learned is there are always so many things you can do to implement it. And it's good to know what could be done wrong.
And yes, there are many facets to what you just said, all of which can be expanded into many deep discussions. And so for those watching and the listeners on the podcast, what we're talking about is a YouTube video that popped into my feed one night, a week or two ago or something. And it is on a YouTube channel called No Boilerplate. And I had never heard of this channel before. It's, I don't know how it ended up in my feed, but the title of the video is Agile Isn't Scrum. And then in parentheses, you're doing Agile wrong, which we're going to take that that topic and expand on it in a couple different directions. And so the author of the video does a very interesting job of producing a very condensed, very succinct, very fast-paced, in my opinion, discussion of Agile, the perceived flaws in the Agile methodology, what people get wrong, what people think is Agile isn't really Agile, and really the topic that has been battering me since I started to look into this concept of Agile is, no, that's not really Agile. That's not real Agile. You're doing Agile wrong. And I have heard that and read that so many times, it's like, wait a minute, does anyone know what Agile is? Is Agile anything? Like, are we talking about some mythical notion that doesn't really exist? It's really fascinating to see the arguments and the disagreements about fundamentally what is Agile. So if you have a chance, hop on YouTube and watch this video by No Boilerplate channel, Agile Isn't Scrum. And I'll caution you, you'll watch it and it will feel very compelling. And I recommend pausing it, thinking about the statements, and you'll really have to look at a larger context to really, I think, understand more of what this person is trying to convey. I think he conveys some things well, but he kind of implies or doesn't explicitly mention other things that are very important to the point he's trying to make. So we'll talk about that today. So head on over to YouTube. That's kind of the basis for this discussion. Agile isn't Scrum. You're doing Agile wrong. And then he strangely pops up slides on his video like Agile sucks. And The point is not, he's not saying that Agile sucks. He's saying that people believe Agile sucks because all of this baggage has been loaded onto this term Agile. And his point is that is not Agile. So in the title, Agile isn't Scrum. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide here. So he jumps right in with a statement saying, if the cost of failure is less than the cost of planning, you must not plan. And that sounds like a very provocative statement, right? And he then very quickly goes through a monologue, which it's kind of hard to digest, but he comes to some quotes like, Agile has come to mean doing half of Scrum poorly and using Jira. And this apparently was made by one of the core team of the Agile manifesto, Andy Hunt, at Pragmatic Andy. And anyone who's tried to adopt Agile or looked into this kind of understands. It's like Agile is waterfall and sprints. That's a quote that we used previously or in our presentation in EMEA. So I wanted to talk about planning in the context of Agile. Now, were there any other points or tidbits or gems that you got out of this video, Christian?
I think it is good that you explained that this quote, Agile sucks, comes from those people experiencing being faced with having to be implemented these methodologies. Many companies sell or coach or train on them and try to implement it, thinking this is slowing us down. And what the main intent of this video, my experience was, think about it. Think of all the methods that came up after the Agile Manifesto was there, trying to make some processes that companies can apply. And that is for me the balance. How much process do I need and how much principles do I have to follow? And the team has the freedom to develop their processes, how to operate and deliver value.
And I as I'm learning kind of about this, and if you read the Agile Manifesto and then the Agile Principles, I kind of liken it to a country's, say there's a country that forms and they adopt a constitution. And I'm from the US, so I'm most familiar with the US Constitution. It's kind of a vague document, right? You think, oh, it's a constitution. It tells us how things are going to work. No, there are thousands and thousands of court cases trying to argue about the meaning of down to one word. What does that one word mean? And the government and states and municipalities adopt their interpretation. And it's almost like that's what has happened to Agile. They came up with this manifesto, which says things, but once you sit there and read it, you realize, well, wait a minute. How do we do this? How do we do that? And,
right, exactly.
And so to your point, people said, oh, well, this is great. We're going to create this thing called Scrum. We're going to create this organization called the Agile Alliance. We're going to adopt extreme programming. And there are all these things that latched onto Agile, and they brought their own interpretation, their own principles, their own frameworks, their own practices that they say, this is Agile. And it's almost like they're riding the coattails of the popularity of this thing called Agile.
I think it could be that this is something that is so ingrained in the Tayloristic area of businesses, where you scientifically take a process apart and make rules in order to avoid people that are doing the job from thinking how they have to do it. So when you read the Agile Manifesto, these are really just principles. They are you can choose either one or the other side. For example, the individuals and the interactions over the documentation part. You can choose what you will aim at. So it's not trivial. But you have, with the principles from the Agile Manifesto, they wanted to limit the space in which you operate. And I think that is very good. But on the other hand, it requires thinking.
And that reminds me of another analogy where, say you have a startup with 5 people. That is one environment. And then let's say you have a country's military. That is a completely different situation. Something that works for those 5 people in a garage doing a tech startup, as it grows and you have people who are at different skill levels, different skills, different capacities, like militaries tend to want very highly structured things. They need frameworks, they need procedures, they need policies. They need to be able to have someone show up at boot camp and tell them exactly what they do, and then 2 weeks later go out and do their job. And I don't know that Agile is well suited to that. At least the pure Agile religion, right? The manifesto, the 12 principles.
Yeah. As you mentioned, the military, Simon Sinek is often bringing the example of the Marines and the Navy SEALs, how they train their teams. And it's one of the most performant teams in the military. And he has the example that they choose the team members that are most trustful over the team members that are the best performers. So they train together. It's like they bring individuals together and make them interact and give them a problem that they cannot solve alone and see how they interact. It's really good matching to the points from the Agile Manifesto. And you have the rules on the one side, but you want to have teams that can deal with any situation, any change that is coming up, any surprise or something like that. And there's nearly the same principles. I watched a video this afternoon from Alan Holub, which he gave at the GoTo conference in 2020. And there's the part people's first. Or people first. It's also in the Agile Manifesto. And his example was trust people to spend the time and the money in a way that makes sense. So often you can see planning as a mechanism because you're not trusting the people that they spend the time and money on software development in a way that makes sense. So you don't want them to think about what is the best way to bring up a solution for this way. So you want to take this away because you're planning and you just want to act them that way you planned. But it's not suiting this environment where you don't know how is this solution built up. How can you build it or something like that?
And I think you're touching on some of the points made in this video. Actually, let me go to here. In this video, and so this is another video or another YouTube video, and the channel is called Continuous Delivery. And it is hosted by Dave Farley, and he happened to have Alan Holub on his channel for a discussion of this topic, and it spawned all sorts of conversations. So this video was controversial enough where people talk about it as kind of a meta conversation, like, oh, Alan and Dave talked about this, and so it's like Agile. Alan and Dave talk about Agile, then people talk about what Alan and Dave said. And so it's this fascinating cascade of events. And one of the things that Alan seems to regularly say is that these frameworks, these other project management principles or whatever they're called, such as, say, Scrum, his interpretation, I believe, is that these were frameworks to package up some agile concepts to try and be more palatable to large organizations. And so the Navy SEALs can operate, say, in an agile manner, if we're stretching that analogy. But you don't want 100,000 troops in the infantry practicing agile. That's probably not a good fit. And so someone said, well, let's adopt some of this concept and let's call it Scrum, and we'll have these meetings and we'll have these sprints and we'll have a Kanban board and we'll have this and that. And at some point, it kind of took on a life of its own and became this thing called Scrum that large corporations said, oh, wow, that's adding structure and agility to our projects. Let's adopt the agile, the agile Scrum framework, which in itself is, like many would argue with that phrase. And go ahead.
It's like offering it as a blueprint for success in software development, but not looking at the circumstances and the context in which it was helpful for those who brought up Scrum and said, okay, this can be a way we are operating, and there's a good way for us to operate, but it is very risky to just copy it to other organizations in different contexts and in different problems. And even the roles Scrum is offering, it could be good for those people acting in these roles to focus on the task at hand. But additionally, you need some people who have talent for the problems that you are facing and want to try for your customers. If you don't have those talent people in the team, no context and no structure will come up with solutions.
And regarding the structure, one of the things that Alan continually criticizes about things like Scrum is they're imposing all sorts of mandates and practices and things you must do. You must
rituals,
have these
or something like that.
Rituals. Thank you. They are rituals, and that evokes this religious context, right? So one must follow the ritual. One must have stand-ups. One must have scrums. One must have, sprints that are 3-week or 4-week sprints, and it imposes this strange ritualistic structure. And I think Alan's point is, why? Get rid of it all. And back to the original video, Agile isn't Scrum. If the cost of planning is higher than actually doing the work and the inherent risk of just getting work done, then you must get rid of that planning ritual. And so there's a blog post, as I mentioned, that things spawned out of this conversation from Continuous Delivery Channel. So someone wrote a blog post, the Less is More Agile post, where he kind of breaks down this conversation and saying, people who are adopting what they think is an agile project management or practice, whatever they call it, it's just all of this cost. And all three of these discussions are saying, get rid of all that isn't really agile. So regarding what is not agile, I titled this slide Faux Agile. And so these are quotes and statements from the original video, Agile isn't Scrum. And he says, Agile is build something and show it to the customer, period. Agile is not Scrum. Agile is not sprints. Agile is not stories or Kanban boards. Agile is not planning poker. Agile is doing what is valuable and not doing what is not. And it's that last statement. It's like, stop doing things that are not valuable. But my assumption is people are so attached, people in organizations are so attached to these practices, these rituals, these structures, that they cannot imagine a truly agile small team that just figures things out on the fly and creates their own implicit rules of how they work together.
Yeah. On the other hand, I was thinking about when some people say such things as Alan Holub or in this video, do they explain in what context this is really working well? I assume they have this experience in a context where the team is really working closely together. In another video, he mentioned this, that he is constantly having Zoom calls with the team members, even if they are on different continents or something like that. And in contexts where you have such people that are merely once a day have a conversation or something like that, or you rely on some other contractors for doing things your team is not capable of, you have to schedule some appointments and meetings, and that is adding planning on top of that. And in addition, you got to have customers that are always available, because when you build something you think it is valuable, one of the principles is you show it to the customer, let them use it, observe how they use it, and see if it's valuable, get the feedback, improve your own thing you build, and so on. I remember 10 or 15 years ago when I was working directly at the customer side, together with the IT administrator and next to the ones who are printing or generating the invoices for their customers. That was kind of such a way of working and operating and creating something. I just made a little attachment, made something that I built and just get instant feedback. That was such a setting. What was annoying back then is when they have a new thing to work on for me and I have to put something down, the things that are not ready piled up, and the business leaders said, when is everything ready? So it's really important that some of the underlying thoughts are also considered when you say, just put the talented people together in a room and they will create value. That is not enough, because the context they are working in has also been set right.
I think you made an important point that is part of the challenge that I've had of learning what is Agile. I hear far more about what Agile is not than I hear about what Agile is. And if I were to look at Alan's Twitter feed, I think he spends a lot more time saying that is not Agile, or I don't do that, I don't like that. And I think, to your point, more context about what does true Agile look like? What's an example? What are some specific practices, and what does this team look like? And how does a Fortune 500 corporation actually adopt and implement true Agile without all of these massive frameworks on top? And I think those examples might be helpful in helping us understand how could we internalize this and start using some of this stuff in our organizations. Because at some point, I understand that what something is not starts to become is initially helpful. You just don't do these things. At some point, you need to know what to do. And I'm having a hard time figuring that out.
Yeah, and I talked to a friend of mine who is in our hometown now, and she's a Scrum Master. And I talked to her with some of the topics we are observing at the moment. And one important notice she made was, for example, about planning poker. So it's planning poker, and it's some kind of ritual in Scrum. It's estimating the complexity of a feature or of a user story, and then thinking. We did this, I think, failure for ourselves in our first attempts, because some of my colleagues asked, okay, how can we translate the story points into hours so we get an overall estimation for the backlog?
Because like our last video, estimates, right? Everyone wants estimates.
Right. Yeah. And the point she made that stick to me was, planning poker is just a way to to support a discussion about common understanding in the team about a problem. It is just a way when different people evaluate the complexity of a problem they want to solve, that is described in a user story, differently, they are more forced to talk to each other what they think could be a solution. So if you are in good contact and have good interactions with your teammates, you don't need a ritual like planning poker, because it's initially in your team interaction how you try to figure out what is the real problem and how can we solve it.
Well, I strangely, in defense of planning poker, I can imagine many scenarios where you could have 5 people in a room on a team talking about the same thing. And I can imagine you would have 5 different, completely different interpretations about what that task entails, the complexity, the amount of work, the interconnections, the consequences, the second order effects of building that. And the developer says, oh yeah, 4 hours, I'll bang that out. And then someone else says, well, you realize that affects our integration with this system. Oh yeah, okay, make it 6 hours. And then the other person says, well, you realize there's a downstream flow of this data that is going to affect our warehouse. Oh, okay, better make it 10 hours. And so that discussion, if that is a practice, I could see that just helping to facilitate a discussion to make sure everyone understands what they are really working on and the scope when they say, I'm going to do this task.
Yeah. And I think what is mentioned in the Agile Manifesto is a principle that they assume or make it a recommendation that is naturally inclined in team members thinking this way from different angles before thinking about the solution. And what is interesting is there must be some structure that is hindering that interaction. And then Scrum is putting back up a ritual to foster again this interaction.
And you use the term hinder, so there could be something hindering, and it could also be that some teams just they don't have good practices for communication. And while one might say, well, then maybe you don't have the best people on your team, but as you and I have discussed before, sometimes organizations can't always cherry pick the superstars of the planet, right? They have 50 people in their organization. They have 10 people who can accomplish this project, and they have a team of 5 of those 10 people. And they may be fairly good, but they may not be experts at anticipating complexity of a given task and consequences of a given task.
Yeah, it could be a too deep way down the rabbit hole now, so stop me when I'm going too deep. There's a notion of some methodologies or thinking tools that say, okay, then assess what is this setting of people capable to do, what are the problems they can do, and form what you are working on around what they problems, around the problems they can actually do. So it's just the way, okay, we're in this business, our customers have this set of problems, and we try to hire people. We, as you said, can cherry pick. So how are the teams formed?
Okay.
Can they decide for themselves, okay, with which ones can I solve this set of problems, this subset of problems, for example? Or are the teams formed by a formal leadership that say, okay, we need these roles, and some people have worked in these roles before, so we put them in these roles and together at this team and give them the task instead of letting them choose the task. So this could be a consequence that more and more processes are needed.
And I to bring this back to a topic that we had in our Directions EMEA session, in the context of Microsoft Dynamics, in the context of Business Central, in the context of small and medium businesses, in the US, I'm going to guess a typical Dynamics partner is 10 people or less, right? And so if that is in any way accurate, you don't have a lot of latitude as to the teams you form, the participants or team members that are on that team, or which projects you can get that team, right? And so that begs the question, is Agile appropriate for those organizations where this isn't the three geniuses who happen to meet and have this brilliant startup idea and they go forth and form it. You have a kind of traditional corporate structure, but small enough that you are constrained. And so Ted has a comment here. In the SMB space, it's rare to find an individual at the company that can visualize the effect of a change across all areas. And absolutely. And any developer, I've been there, my developer's been there, any developer, when they get asked how long is something going to take, they'll think and they'll say, well, I need to go back and think about it. And they'll be pushed. Well, give me a ballpark, right? Give me a ballpark estimate. Like, are we talking 10 hours, 100 hours? And there's always a demand for that in the consulting space, at least in my experience. And they'll say, okay, I think it's going to be 16 hours. But they're thinking about their development time, their coding time, their, getting these coding structures. They're not thinking about project management, additional calls with the customer, changing requirements, environment issues, deployment issues, bugs, and like all these other things that do happen with every single task. And so it's that narrow mindset is kind of dangerous. And I'm kind of roaming off in a different direction. But I think the overall point is, to your point, sometimes these structures may be invented or manufactured or implemented in order to help an organization try to cope or try to facilitate that organization project management, for instance. Now, to the point of the Agile is not Scrum video, to the point of Alan's video on continuous delivery channel, let's move on to a few examples of what they are ranting against. Like, you could argue that maybe these scrums, maybe these Kanban boards, maybe these planning rituals are questionable and could be abandoned. But check out some of the things that have been latched on to the word Agile that will just blow your mind. It blew my mind. So this is, I don't know if this is new. I think it's kind of new-ish, but there is this thing called SAFe. And Alan really rails against this. It's kind of absurd in a sense. I don't know who's adopting this. I don't know who thinks it's good, other than the people who are selling the training, who are selling the certifications, this multi-million-dollar industry to sell this to large corporations. Because no small company is going to pay for this, and I'll make that very clear. So SAFe is Scaled Agile Framework. And I think there's a company, Scaled Agile, that invented this. And this is just 10 items of what they call the SAFe Lean Agile principles. Lean-Agile. Not only is it agile, but it's lean and agile. And I think this is almost comical. And I mean, take an economic view as point number 1. Apply systems thinking is 2. And base milestones on objective evaluation of working systems. Like, the lingo it gets pretty dense. Apply cadence, synchronize with cross-domain planning. Come on, Christian, apply your cadence and synchronize with your cross-domain planning. Like, come on. Why aren't you doing number 7? Decentralized decision-making, which will be extremely comical, you'll see in the next slide. organize around value. And notice organize around value is number 10 on this list. If you go back to the Agile manifesto, I think there was a point. Agile is build something and show it to the customer. Agile is doing what is valuable and not doing what is not. That is a core tenet, like the leading principle of Agile. And yet here in the scaled Agile framework, number 10, only once you do all these other 9 things do you get to number 10, where you consider value. And I think that is telling.
Yeah, and in the Agile manifesto, in the videos they make some clearance about what they perceive as valuable or as value. It's working software, and in one of the videos I found it very good that they be a little bit more concrete on working software, not just working software. It's solving customers' problems. It's well architected. It's clean code principles. It's developed in a way that it can be safely and fast changed to the new problems that come up and require something that has to be changed, but in an easy way and in a safe way, like with automated testing and something like that. So working software in the hands of the customer is the value, as I perceive, is the goal of the Agile Manifesto.
And yes, you can write a whole bunch of software. It may not be valuable to your customer. And so I think having number 10 sitting here, organized around value, that tells me almost everything I need to know about this SAFE framework. And check this out. It gets better. Are you sitting down, folks? And for those listening, I highly recommend searching for Scaled Agile Framework. And this slide is a doozy. Search for SAFE 5 for Lean Enterprise. It's right on the homepage of their website. And look at this work of art. This is a true thing of beauty. Not only is it lean, but it's agile. And we are looking at a slide that it has so much stuff on here. I have no idea what to look at. Nothing. Like continuous delivery pipeline is one item in the middle of this giant mess. What do you make of this?
I'm very irritated when I looked first at this, and if I take it further, if I'm irritated, I would try asking. So I would like to ask many questions about this. Just too many aspects and concepts on one slide. If you see the tabs on the top, you have overview, essential, large solution, portfolio, and full. So you pick the full view. I want to do everything. I need everything.
Of course. You need to get value out of the $150,000 you're paying to train your project managers to learn SAFE 5 for Lean Enterprise, because that is just cutting edge, right?
Yeah. And how is design thinking applied there? How is Scrum applied there? How is Kanban applied there?
Funny you mentioned that, because out of this giant graphic, look at Scrum. Scrum is one little word here in the bottom left, and there's XP got tacked on because extreme programming. I'm assuming that's what that means. And so, hey, we're not only agile, we're lean, we're Scrum, we're XP. And I'm like, you have to squint to see it, right? And there's a Kanban board. This is truly, and what's fascinating is someone paid to have this done, and someone thought this was a good idea. And so I find it fascinating. Obviously, this is not for SMB. I'm assuming, this is not for a small organization. This would be for some of the largest corporations, I'm assuming. I don't know who else would try to implement this or could afford to pay for it. And I love these terms. Built-in quality with a nice quality check mark, right? Like quality is implicit if you use our framework. And DevOps is a little circle here. So this is what Alan and, sorry, I forgot his name, Dave? Dave Farley.
Dave Farley.
Dave Farley. Alan and Dave are railing against when people say this is agile, that is agile, Scrum is agile, Safe is agile. And they're like, I don't know what this is, but it's a monstrosity and it is not agile. Um,
And just now that I'm looking at it, and in the left bottom corner, you have this persons together. I assume this is a development team. They don't even made it to have a text that is saying developer on the whole slide. And if you look up and you imagine how many hierarchy levels are involved in the planning process to check and approve that you can do what you want to do to deliver value,
yeah.
Makes an impression of how much processes are dumped on those people. And coming back to one of the first slides, I really feel with the people that say, okay, if you want to apply this framework to us, we are really struggling to deal with it because we want to deliver value. You don't have to motivate us. We are motivated. That they say or state Agile sucks.
Yes, excellent point. Bringing it back home, why does Agile suck? It's because someone told that person that this is Agile, right? And to your point about the teams, there's this column here. Guess who's at the bottom? The actual team. They are at the bottom of this dog pile of organizational structure with the team, the product owner, the scrum master. Implicitly, you got to have a scrum master to wrangle the animals, right? And then you go up the stack. Oh, well, they are subsidiary to the system architect and engineer, product management, and RTE. I'd have to look up what that means. And then above them are the business owners. And then you have an STE, solutions management solution architect. And then above that, you have epic owners. Sounds pretty epic. I'd like to be an epic owner. And then an enterprise architect. And this all exists in the portfolio vision and strategic themes of enterprise and government. I mean, I would go crazy if I were a developer on this team that had 100 people above me deciding what, how, when, where, why things are occurring. That doesn't sound like
what
Agile.
I would like to ask is, where are the users?
That's a great point. Let's see if we could see users.
I don't know if they are in the team that is made upon these icons with persons there. Don't know. But I assume that the real needs of the users and the ones that are doing the business with their customers should be pipelined by the business owners to the planning team, the product management, and then the agile teams that are developing.
Yep. Oh, well, there's customer centricity. I mean, obviously, when you have 87 layers of management, you have customer centricity. It's like, it's funny. This is like buzzword bingo. They throw all of this stuff on a slide, like the kitchen sink, and well, there it is. It's customer centricity. Even though I would argue it's impractical to include customer centric anything if your organization is this convoluted. But
yeah.
This is an example of what Alan and Dave say is not agile, and I totally agree. I would have no argument against that, right?
Right.
Ted says that RTE is release, train, engineer. I don't know if he's joking or not, but it kind of does look like that person's a train conductor in the icon. So can you imagine having a release, train, engineer?
Someone who is looking that the releases are coming out of the pipeline as expected and as planned, for example, and that are the right features, because that could be another topic for an episode as well, because what is the right thing to build in order to deliver value? I just watched another video about that Agile is just making development companies producing more output faster, but are they delivering value? Is there some outcome because they do this? There was a really good example in this talk. I don't remember her name. She said, is it important for you that Amazon delivers hundreds of features to the application each day? Or what is for you valuable when you use Amazon? And in the audience, someone says, it's buying books. And I don't care how many features they throw out.
Right.
I just want this streamlined process that I can order a book there.
And to that point, sometimes you need some structure to rein in the explosive creativity of your amazing dev team, right? And so you could have an agile team that just goes off on a tangent. But I will warn you, developers never go off on tangents because they're always focused on the correct task, right? But we know the reality is, I've worked with a lot of developers, and I give a project over and I say, this is what I need done. And they go forth and they do it. They return and they said, oh, well, I did this. And I look at my list of things I asked them to do, and I ask them, why did you do this? And they said, well, I think it would be good to have in case of X, Y, and Z. I look at my list and I'm like, X, Y, and Z is not on my list. So I think there is a need to try to rein in this creativity, as I'll politely call it. And so, yeah, how do you decide what is valuable? I think there is a need for that. So someone on the team needs to be leading or guiding that effort. I don't think this is it. And yes. So anyway, this is one just staggering interpretation of Agile, right? And yeah. So moving on. So what is Agile? If people say that Agile is not this, Agile is not that, what is Agile? And I listed some quotes here. If you go to agilemanifesto.org, you will see the Agile Manifesto, which kind of like, say, a country's vague constitution, sounds good in theory till you start to do stuff and you realize it doesn't have specific guidance for how you should implement it. But then they came up with Agile Manifesto principles, which do offer a little more direction as to how you might adopt Agile. Our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software, period. And it's a pretty succinct statement. Now, can organizations achieve that? How do they achieve that? What is value? What is early? What is continuous?
Each organization has to come up with own ideas.
Yeah.
And what experiments can they make from those ideas with the least risk, not to risk the whole business, but they have to think about what is applicable for our market, which we are in, for the problems that our customers have and the capabilities we have in our team. They have to think about it from themselves, and they're really good prepared if they do it and not steal any blueprint or method from anyone who says, I was successful with that, without knowing the real context they were successful in.
And I think that's an interesting point. It could be that these frameworks are appealing because they are so much easier to buy off the shelf than to do that self-reflection and understand ironically, to understand one's own organization, one's own product and customer. You'd think that that wouldn't be too hard, but I mean, and to be fair, if you're in an organization of 100,000 people, maybe it's just not viable. You don't have the autonomy to make that assessment because you're in this tiny pocket of this massive organization. And so, you don't have control over the customer, the vision, and any of these things. And
Yes.
so in that case, maybe Agile just isn't for you. And
Yeah.
maybe that's why we're
But
seeing this.
but this organization, even if it's so big, can make a decision in which market we are in, what kind of problems we are dealing with, that they can decide on. What do they set as a goal or as a direction they want to, and what they want not to work on. That is often more easier to fulfill and to say, what do we not want to do? As on the other slide, just don't do something that is not valuable or is hindering delivering value to your customers.
But if the person making the choice of what is valuable is completely disconnected from the people doing the work, and there are 12 layers of who knows what in between.
Yeah, that's why the Agile Manifesto values interaction between the
Yep.
individuals.
Yep. So the next point, another point I pulled from Agile Manifesto principles: deliver working software frequently. And you and I have discussed this at length. And in the SMB market and among Business Central customers, while I could potentially fulfill this principle, often my customers cannot keep up with it. So if they ask for a feature, I might be able to deliver that feature 2 days later. They are unable to consume that new feature. They're unable to review it, to evaluate it, test it, and provide me with feedback. And so I have found that to be a challenge, that just like Microsoft can have a monthly and semi-annual release pace for Business Central, that is too fast for me. And I am desperately trying to keep up with them. If it's too fast for me, it's certainly too fast for many of my customers. And the same can exist in the case of me building a PTE for a customer. They say, oh, I'd like X, Y, and Z. Great. 3 days later, we deliver. They're like, oh, sorry, I'm month-end close. Pretty soon, 3 weeks goes by, they haven't looked at the changes of the PTE. So delivering working software frequently is appealing sounding. Reality often gets in the way of that. Working software is the primary measure of progress. I think this often gets lost in to-do lists and backlogs and priorities and scrums and sprints. And in our small organization, we focus on delivery. What are we working on? Can we code it? When's our next release? And we push it. And it's like, we don't sweat the structure and formalities at all. So I think we're doing okay. We don't deliver as frequently as we want for our internal build, but working software is the primary measure of progress. And I think working does a lot of work in that phrase, right? Working software. You can deliver a lot of non-working software, but working software is a key.
And I would add to this point, in the hands of users.
Good point. I could have 1,000 releases of a back-end framework before the end user customer sees anything, right? Yeah. And so that is a challenge. And in the dev world, you often have dependencies. Oh, well, in order to build our app, we need an API. In order to have an API, we need to have a web service. In order to have a web service that does anything, we need a backend database. That means we need a data access layer. And that means we need infrastructure. We need hosting. We need multi-region failover, which I just recently dealt with, right? And so like one thing leads to another. And so what we've done is we've said, okay, minimum viable product, bang out a prototype. Then we backfill with the less essential things, right?
Yeah. Because it doesn't have so much planning involved to bring this out for someone to test it, to use it, and give feedback on, is this really valuable or not? It could be that you can put it in the waste bin, and since you've done that moment, you know what to build.
Yes, and the minimum viable product, proof of concept, prototype, whatever you want to call it, getting that into the hands of the user first can save you 100 hours from
Yeah,
building out that back end. It's like,
yeah,
oh, cool. We didn't even need to do all that back end stuff. So perfect. I'm glad we delivered that proof of concept early on.
yeah, right.
Um, Ted says, IT folks seem to have a personality that loves change, users don't. I agree. We like novelty, right? We like new technologies. We like new frameworks. I see on Twitter a lot. Ooh, .NET 27.6, like whatever framework number .NET is on. I'm like, um, I don't
And the
get it.
users and the users are interested in, are the orders shipped to my customer?
Yes, not one of my customers has ever asked me. No one in accounts payable asked me what .NET framework is being used by my application. Never. Literally never. They don't care if it's PHP, ASP, C Sharp, Java. They don't care. And if I try to bring it up, they'll be like, I don't know what you're talking about. I just want this software to work. So the latest and greatest tool, tech, framework, whatever, irrelevant for the end user. Simplicity, the art of maximizing the amount of work done. Sorry. Simplicity, the art of maximizing the amount of work not done is essential. I think I need to work on that. And I think that goes back to the whole prototype, proof of concept, early delivery of something, minimum viable product. Because as you pointed out, well, if you realize some feature is not valuable, you can stop working on that and you can move on to something that is more valuable, thus saving the work that is not going to be done.
Yeah, and for that you have to interact with the users and speak with more of them and listen carefully to those needs they have. They come up more and more and more, and then you know what is valuable for more users. I had a little prototype in a hackathon we did in May in the company. I brought it to our production system in this hackathon because I wanted to bring this out, that other users can use it. More than half a year later, now this month, I got so many requests on enhancing this because now this is needed because our customers have a higher demand on this. Now I'm seeking for a way to have time to build these features because the users are really demanding it. Often it's the point in time when the value is needed. And you have to be open for that because if you're not, you end up with more planning and delaying and something like that. You don't deliver value fast and good for the customers.
And in the context of Business Central, I'm pretty sure we've all seen some release note line item, and I read it. One, I don't understand what it is. Two, once I figure out what it is, I'm wondering who asked for this, and then that makes me wonder what is the communication channel that's leading into that resulted in that being a priority. And I'm often puzzled by this. And it's not just Business Central, it's Dynamics GP is the same way. It's like, wait a minute, you had a fixed budget, and that budget was spent changing this word throughout the application. This literally happened in Dynamics GP. Like, wow. You delivered 3 things, and one of them was changing a word on captions throughout the application, menus, everything. Doesn't sound like a high priority to me. So
yeah, and it's not related to the votes on BC idea neither.
yes, and that's what becomes clear when 5 of us are sitting around looking at this list and saying, what is this? That's kind of a sign that there's some disconnect in that communication channel. Now, maybe there was a dependency, maybe there was a compliance requirement, but oftentimes like, what? How did this get to the top of the stack? And I do wonder if there are some of these frameworks going on in the development of the product that have these long cycles, right? It got put on the Kanban board. It sounded good at the time. And then it gains that organizational momentum because this is the framework we follow. And it got on the Kanban board. It got upvoted by 5 people. And no one thought to ditch that feature when they realized there was no demand for it. And that's also a principle of Agile. It's like, hey, we are, the last point on my slide here, at regular intervals, the team reflects on how to become more effective, then tunes and adjusts its behavior accordingly. And that applies to features as well. We're halfway through the development of this new feature. Wait a minute. It's no longer relevant. It's no longer valuable. We have feedback it's not wanted. We have feedback that this is more important, this other feature. Abandon the development. Like the sunk cost fallacy is so strong in so many portions of our lives. Like, well, we're halfway done. We can't abandon this feature that no one wants, right?
We put so much work in it.
Right? It's like, I'm so proud of this useless feature. How can we not release it? And it's like,
it's sometimes
okay,
hard to let go.
I get it, right? But it's very powerful when you can. When you can abandon that, drop it, like let go of your ego and the pride and like, maybe that's not valuable. Let me listen to my customer and move on and do something that is valuable to the customer. It's difficult. So,
and I think you can sum up the last point to the point of learning. Learn as we work was some of the quotes from the videos I got. And letting go of a feature and realizing this isn't important anymore, or it could be solved by using another service or another technology or something like that. I had this discussion this morning with one of my colleagues. He was very excited about an idea he had, so he shared it with me. And I just took some other perspectives and was a little bit devil's advocate on that. Yeah. And found out it could match some of the things Microsoft did already, even in the telemetry app or something like that. And I proposed, hey, look at this. Could it be an idea to have in Business Central or NAV the thing from the Power BI environment app for the telemetry inside our client next to the data from the customer? Could this be valuable that you work on that instead of building the same thing Microsoft did with another technology? And having those discussions and developing those new ideas is really appealing to me and is underlying everything I try to give back to my colleagues and our customers.
Excellent. Well, we have kind of touched on the idea of, in a broad respect, planning. And it comes in many forms and flavors in the world of Agile and Scrum, and as we saw, SAFe. And I think the lesson is when you're inclined to develop a ritual or implement a ritual with your projects or your development or your product management, step back and think, is this really adding value? And maybe your organization does need that, does benefit from it, or your team, but don't just adopt it just because someone said this is Agile or this is lean or this is extreme programming. Does it work for you?
Yeah, and reassess it in some periods of time and thinking, what are these processes and rules that were valuable at some point in time? Are they providing value anymore? Or are they really hindering creating and delivering value, and get rid of them?
And I suspect that is perhaps one of the most difficult things, because once an organization adopts a practice, to stop and think about whether that is still adding value and potentially abandoning that thing that that is comfortable, that is routine, that may be one of the hardest things of all.
Yeah.
And with that is our our meandering discussion on planning in the context of Agile. And what do you think about that? And I'm learning there's no right answer, but I'm seeing a lot of that is not Agile. So just wanted to share that. And thank you, Kristen, for joining me. And yeah, have a good evening.
Yeah, well, thank you that we could have another episode on that. Was very valuable for me because I'm learning as much as I discuss those topics with you, and perhaps we could deliver some perspectives for the audience.
Excellent. Well, thanks everyone for watching, and we'll chat soon. Okay.